"He's not my father." The words came out of the little girl's mouth in a rush, as if she were afraid they might be taken back if she didn't say them fast enough. She stood just inside the doorway of the restaurant, rain-dark curls clinging to her forehead, her small chest rising and falling too quickly. Before anyone could react, she crossed the room and stopped directly in front of the man sitting alone by the window. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Please don't let them make me go." 2. A few heads turned. Then more. The quiet hum of the dining room thinned, stretched, and finally snapped into silence. The man looked up, startled. Ethan Cole had not noticed the child until she spoke. At 40, he had trained himself to tune out distractions, to eat without looking around, to exist in public without truly being present. He preferred it that way. Fewer questions, fewer complications. Children were complications. "I don't want to move again," the girl continued, stepping closer, close enough that he could see the faint smudge of dirt on her cheek. "I'll be quiet. I promise. I won't touch anything." Her hand reached out and grabbed the front of his coat. The contact sent a jolt through him. "No," he said automatically, his voice low and firm, more reflex than intention. "You shouldn't." But she was already shaking her head. "They said you were important," she whispered, eyes wide. "They said people listen to you." Ethan froze. This was exactly the kind of moment he avoided. The kind that unraveled control. He could already feel the attention pulling toward him like gravity. Feel the weight of eyes recognizing his face. His name. He didn't want this. He didn't want anything involving a child, especially not a frightened one in the middle of a public place. There were rules for a reason, boundaries. Lines you didn't cross because once you did, you never really stepped back. "He's not my father," the girl said again, louder now, turning halfway toward the room. "I don't know him, but I don't want to go with them." Them. 2 adults were hurrying across the floor toward them now, a woman in a practical coat and a man with a clipped expression, both wearing the same look of controlled urgency. "Annie," the woman said, forcing a calm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We talked about this. You can't just run off." Annie clutched Ethan's coat tighter. "You said it would be different," she cried. "You always say that." Ethan swallowed. He stood up, more abruptly than he intended. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing every remaining eye in the room. "I don't know this child," he said immediately, holding his hands slightly away from his sides, as if to show he hadn't invited this. "There's been a mistake." The woman nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We're very sorry." Annie looked up at him, panic flooding her face. "Please," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "Don't say that. If you say that, they won't listen anymore." Something twisted in his chest. Ethan looked down at her hand on his coat. Small, thin, holding on as if letting go were not an option. "I don't want trouble," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, especially not with a child. I won't be trouble," Annie said instantly. "I swear, I'll sit wherever you want. I just need a minute." "A minute." The man with the badge cleared his throat. "Sir, she's a ward of the state. She's emotional. We'll handle it." Annie shook her head so hard her braids swung loose. "They're taking me again," she said. "I didn't even get to keep my drawings last time." Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. Again, that single word carried weight, history, a pattern. He opened his eyes and met the woman's gaze. "How many placements?" She hesitated. "Just long enough," Annie answered for her. 5. The number landed between them, heavy and undeniable. Ethan felt a wave of discomfort roll through him, sharp and unwelcome. He had spent years building a life that was orderly, predictable. No surprises, no emotional landmines. He gave money where money was needed. He funded programs, signed checks, attended galas. That was the arrangement. You helped from a distance so you didn't have to see the mess up close. This was too close. "Annie," he said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "You shouldn't ask strangers for help like this." She looked at him with devastating seriousness. "You don't feel like a stranger." That stopped him. Behind her, the woman shifted her weight. "Sir, We really need to go. Annie's voice broke. Please. Just don't let them take me right now. Please. The room felt smaller, hotter. Ethan became acutely aware of his own heartbeat, of the way his mind raced through consequences, headlines, lawyers, questions he didn't want to answer. He didn't want this. And yet, how old are you? He asked, surprising himself. Annie blinked. 6, almost 7. He nodded slowly. Almost 7. Old enough to remember every move. Old enough for each one to leave a mark. One night, he said suddenly. The words were out before he had fully decided to say them. The woman frowned. I'm sorry? One night. Ethan repeated, exhaling. Let her stay where she is tonight. Then you can do whatever paperwork you need to do. That's not how it works, the man said. We can't. You can. Ethan interrupted, his tone still calm but firmer now. You just don't want to. Annie's eyes widened. Really? Ethan looked down at her, conflicted, uneasy, already regretting how complicated this would become. One night, he said again. That's all. The woman glanced around, aware now of the audience, of the whispers. She sighed. One night, she said finally. We'll return in the morning. Annie's grip loosened, just slightly. Thank you, she whispered, her voice small but certain. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood there, aware that by doing nothing more than not walking away, he had already stepped into trouble he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Outside, the city went on exactly as before. Inside, something had changed. The car ride away from the restaurant was quieter than Ethan expected. Annie sat in the back seat, buckled in with practiced efficiency, her small hands folded tightly in her lap, as if she were afraid to touch anything that didn't belong to her. She stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past storefronts closing for the night, traffic signals changing from green to red, whether anyone was there to see them or not. Ethan drove without music. He usually did at night. Silence helped him think. Tonight, it only made him more aware of the weight in the car that hadn't been there an hour earlier. This isn't where I usually go, Annie said suddenly, her voice careful. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Where do you usually go? She hesitated. Places with rules. That was not an answer a 6-year-old should have had ready. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. There will be rules tonight too, he said. Just fewer. She nodded, accepting this as reasonable. They stopped at a red light. A bus rumbled past, nearly empty, its interior lights harsh and unforgiving. Ethan thought of how many children probably rode buses like that late at night, going places they hadn't chosen, guided by adults who meant well but rarely asked what it felt like. Do you live alone? Annie asked. Yes. Is it quiet? Yes. She considered this. That's good. Loud places make it hard to sleep. Ethan said nothing. He was beginning to understand that Annie didn't fill silence because she liked to talk. She filled it because she had learned that if she didn't, someone else would decide things for her. His apartment building rose ahead of them, glass, steel, discreet security. A place designed to keep the outside world at a comfortable distance. The doorman's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly when he saw Annie, but he said nothing. He had learned long ago that questions were rarely welcome. Upstairs, the apartment was exactly as Ethan had left it. Immaculate, neutral, untouched by anything resembling chaos or childhood. The lights came on automatically, casting a soft glow over clean lines and carefully chosen furniture. Annie stepped inside and stopped. She didn't move further. Just stood there, taking it in. You can come in, Ethan said, unsure why he felt the need to reassure her. I'm just looking, she said. So I remember. Remember. He watched her walk slowly across the living room, her fingers brushing the edge of the sofa, the smooth surface of the coffee table. She moved like someone mapping an unfamiliar place, committing details to memory in case she never saw them again. There's no TV rules here, she said after a moment. Is that okay? Ethan almost smiled. We'll figure it out. He realized then that he had no idea what children ate for dinner, or what time they went to bed, or what they needed to feel safe. His life had been structured around decisions measured in millions, not bedtime routines. I should call them, he said, mostly to himself. Annie stiffened. "Are they coming back?" "No," he said quickly. "Not tonight. I just need to check in." She watched him carefully as he stepped aside to make the call. Every word he said was polite, measured, careful not to promise anything beyond what had already been agreed. When he hung up, she relaxed again, just slightly. "Do you get in trouble a lot?" she asked. "No," he said. "I try not to." She nodded solemnly. "Me too. But sometimes trouble comes anyway." Dinner was simple. Too simple. He worried takeout from a place downstairs, served on real plates because he didn't own paper ones. Annie ate slowly, methodically, as if unsure whether there would be more later. "You can have as much as you want," Ethan said. She looked at him, surprised. "Really?" "Yes." She took one more bite, then another. Afterward, she asked for a glass of water and carried it carefully to the couch, sitting with her feet tucked underneath her. She didn't turn on the television until he told her it was fine. When the time came to prepare for bed, Ethan stood in the hallway, uncertain. "There's a guest room," he said. "It's clean." She followed him, clutching her small backpack to her chest. He noticed how little it weighed. The guest room had never been used. The bed was perfectly made, untouched. Annie climbed onto it and sat in the middle, bouncing once, then stopping as if afraid she'd done something wrong. "This is nice," she said. "Do you mind if I leave the light on?" "Not at all." She lay down, shoes neatly placed by the bed, backpack beside her pillow. "Mr. Cole?" she asked as he turned to leave. "Yes? You're not going to change your mind, right?" The question hit him harder than he expected. If this moment touched you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. Like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. "No," he said. "I won't." She nodded, satisfied for now. Ethan stood in the hallway for a long moment after the door closed. He felt out of place in his own home, as if something essential had shifted without his permission. Later, unable to sleep, he sat at his desk and opened his laptop. He searched terms he hadn't typed in years. Foster care placement frequency, temporary housing protocols, age-based transitions. The language was clinical, efficient, devoid of faces. He found statistics, numbers that looked neat on a screen. 5 placements by age 6 was not unusual. That was worse than he expected. In the early hours of the morning, he heard a soft knock on his door. Annie stood there in her socks, eyes wide but dry. "I had a bad dream," she said. "Is it okay if I sit here for a minute?" He nodded and pulled out a chair. She sat, hugging her knees. "I don't usually tell people when I'm scared," she said. "But you look like you won't get mad." "I don't get mad easily," he replied. She studied him. "You look confused." He let out a quiet breath. "That's fair." She smiled faintly, then rested her head against the arm of the chair. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Ethan watched her sleep, aware that morning would bring questions, paperwork, and consequences he hadn't yet fully considered. But for now, she was here, and for the first time in a long while, he did not turn away. Morning arrived quietly. Ethan noticed it first not by light, but by sound, the distant hum of traffic below, the muted rhythm of a city beginning another workday. He had slept in his chair, head tilted back, one arm resting awkwardly on the desk. His neck ached. He welcomed it. Pain meant he hadn't dreamed. For a moment, he forgot why he was there. Then he heard it. Soft movement down the hallway. Careful footsteps, as if the person making them didn't want to disturb the air itself. Ethan opened his eyes just as Annie appeared in the doorway. Still in her socks, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "You said morning," she said quietly. "Is it morning now?" He glanced at the clock. 6:42 a.m. "Yes," he said. "It is." She nodded, reassured, and stepped inside. She didn't ask where to sit. She chose the same chair as the night before and climbed into it, folding her legs beneath her with practiced precision. "They always come early," she said. Ethan straightened. "Who?" "The people who move you," Annie replied. There was no bitterness in her voice, only certainty. "They say it's easier that way. Less crying." Something tightened in his chest. "I told them they could come after breakfast," he said. She studied his face, as if weighing whether that promise had weight. Then she asked, "What's breakfast like here?" He hesitated, undecided. She considered this. "Do you have cereal?" "Yes." "Milk?" "Yes." "Then it's probably okay." They canned with the rings. He almost smiled. Breakfast was quiet. Annie sat at the kitchen counter, swinging her feet slightly as she ate, stopping occasionally to look around as if committing the scene to memory. The sunlight made its way slowly across the floor, catching dust motes Ethan had never noticed before. "This is nicer than the other places," she said. "Why?" he asked. She shrugged. "You don't rush." At 8:15, the doorbell rang. Annie froze. Her spoon clinked against the bowl as her hand tightened. She didn't run this time. She didn't cry. She simply looked at Ethan, eyes wide and waiting. "I'll handle it," he said. He opened the door to find the same woman from the night before, clipboard in hand, expression neutral but alert. The man with her was new, older, heavier, with tired eyes that suggested years spent navigating uncomfortable situations. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," the woman said. "We appreciate your cooperation." You're early," Ethan replied evenly. She glanced at her watch. "We're on time." Annie appeared behind him, just far enough back to remain unseen from the hallway. "We'd like to speak with Annie," the man said. Ethan didn't move aside. "She's eating breakfast." The woman blinked, momentarily thrown off. "That's not..." "She hasn't finished," Ethan said. His tone remained polite, but final. "You can wait." There was a pause. A recalibration. "May we come in?" the man asked. Ethan stepped back just enough to allow them inside, positioning himself subtly between them and Annie. Annie watched silently, her face carefully blank. "We need to proceed with the transfer," the woman said. "The new placement is prepared." Annie's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. "She's had 6 placements in 3 years, Ethan said. "That's correct?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "It's not ideal, but it's legal," Ethan finished. "I know." Two-manned. The woman's jaw tightened. "Mr. Cole, with all due respect, this process exists to protect children." "Then why does she look like this?" Ethan asked, nodding toward Annie. They all turned. Annie met their gaze steadily. "I didn't break anything," she said softly. "I promise." The woman exhaled. "Annie, sweetheart, this is just another step." Annie shook her head once. "You said that last time?" Silence. Ethan felt the familiar urge to retreat, to let the system take over, to trust that procedures were better equipped to handle this than he was. That urge had built his entire life. It had also failed more people than he cared to admit. "She doesn't need another step," he said. "She needs stability." The man frowned. "Are you proposing?" "I'm proposing a pause," Ethan replied. "A proper review." The woman's expression hardened. "You don't have standing." Ethan met her gaze. "I do if I file for temporary guardianship." That landed. Annie's head snapped toward him. "You can do that?" she asked, hope and fear colliding in her voice. "Yes," he said. "If you want me to." The woman shook her head. "This is highly irregular. So was letting her stay here last night," Ethan said. "And yet," the man rubbed his forehead. "This will take time." "Good," Ethan said. "She's had enough rushing." Annie slid off the stool and walked slowly toward him. She didn't grab his coat this time. She stood beside him, close but not clinging. "You don't have to," she said quietly. "I don't want you to get in trouble." Ethan looked down at her. "I don't want you to keep moving," he replied. The woman glanced between them, clearly reassessing. "We'll need to involve supervisors." "Please do." They left an hour later, with promises instead of orders. Annie watched them go from the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "Does this mean I stay?" she asked. "For now," Ethan said honestly. She nodded. "That's okay. For now is better than nothing." Later that afternoon, as Ethan made calls and reviewed documents he hadn't touched in years, Annie sat on the floor nearby, drawing quietly. When she finished, she held up the page. It was simple. 2 stick figures standing side by side. "This is you," she said, pointing. "And this is me." Ethan swallowed. "What are we doing?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Not walking away." He taped the drawing to the inside of his desk drawer. Morning had brought questions, afternoon brought consequences, and somewhere between them, a line had been crossed. The afternoon settled into the apartment like an uneasy truce. Ethan worked at the dining table, sleeves rolled up, laptop open, papers spread in a careful grid that mirrored the way his mind was trying to impose order on something that resisted it. He made calls he hadn't made in years to legal counsel, to a compliance officer, to a former board contact who owed him a favor and didn't ask why. Each conversation ended the same way. Pauses, measured words, cautions wrapped in politeness. This would not be simple. This would not be quick. Across the room, Annie sat on the rug with her backpack open, its contents arranged in a small, deliberate circle. 3 crayons worn down to nubs, a folded worksheet with a teacher's name written in ink at the top. A pair of socks rolled tightly together. She touched each item once, as if checking they were still real. "Do you need help?" Ethan asked without looking up. She shook her head. "I'm just making sure nothing's missing." Aided. He nodded, then stopped himself. "From what?" She thought about it. "From me." The answer lingered longer than it should have. By late afternoon, the city outside had brightened into its usual weekday rhythm. Ethan stood by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, listening as his attorney laid out options in careful, conservative language. Temporary guardianship petitions, emergency motions, the likely response from the department, the media risk. Children complicated everything. When he ended the call, he noticed Annie watching him not openly, not intrusively, but with a focus that suggested she was learning how to read his face. "They're not happy," she said. "No," he replied. "They're cautious." She accepted this distinction. "That means they're thinking." "Yes, that's better than not thinking." Ethan let out a breath. "You're right." She returned to her drawing, satisfied. An hour later, the doorbell rang again. Annie stiffened, then caught herself. She stayed where she was, hands flat on the rug, eyes moving to Ethan without panic this time, waiting for his cue. He appreciated that more than he expected. "I'll get it," he said. The woman from the morning stood outside, alone now. Her posture was different, less rigid, more careful. She held her clipboard lower, as if trying not to make it the first thing he saw. "We need to talk," she said. "Come in," Ethan replied. She stepped inside, glancing briefly toward the living room where Annie sat. Annie raised her hand in a small, tentative wave. The woman hesitated, then nodded back, an awkward mirror of the gesture. "I spoke with my supervisor," the woman said, "and legal." "And?" Ethan asked. She inhaled. "There are concerns." "Of course there are. You're not family. You've never fostered. You have no prior relationship with Annie." Annie's shoulders drew in, just slightly. "And yet," Ethan said, "she's here, calm, fed, not being moved tonight. That's temporary." "So is everything," he replied evenly. The woman's jaw tightened, then relaxed. "We're authorizing a 72-hour review period. No transfers. No overnight removals." Annie looked up. 3 days? "Yes," the woman said, softer now. 3 days. Annie nodded slowly, as if placing the number somewhere safe. "There will be interviews," the woman continued. "Home evaluation. Background checks. A bad. Do what you need to do," Ethan said. She studied him. "You understand this could end badly." "I understand it could end without me doing anything," he replied. "And I'm not comfortable with that." The woman gathered her clipboard. "We'll be in touch." After she left, Annie stayed quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do they take you away if they don't like what they see?" "No," Ethan said. "They take children away." She considered this. "That doesn't seem fair." "It often isn't." And, that evening, Ethan ordered groceries instead of takeout. The delivery arrived with bags heavier than he expected, filled with items he'd chosen impulsively, cereal Annie had pointed to on the screen. Apples, milk, bread, things that suggested routine. He watched Annie help unpack, placing items carefully in the refrigerator, on shelves. She paused at the fruit bowl. "Can I have one now?" she asked. "Yes." She picked an apple, held it in both hands. At the last place, they had rules about when you could eat. There will be rules here too, Ethan said gently. But not about apples. She smiled at that. A small smile. Quick, but real. After dinner, she asked if there were books. He showed her the shelves in his office, heavy with titles that hadn't been opened in years. She scanned them, then pulled out a thin paperback someone had gifted him long ago and he'd never read. This one, she said. It looks lonely, and down. They sat on opposite ends of the couch while she read aloud, stumbling over words, correcting herself without prompting. Ethan listened, not interrupting, noting how she slowed when she sensed he was paying attention. Later, as bedtime approached, Annie lingered in the hallway. Do you lock the doors? She asked. Yes. Can you check them again? He did. Twice. When he returned, she was standing by the guest room door, backpack already placed by the bed. Mr. Cole? She said. Yes. If I have to leave after 3 days. Will you still remember me? The question caught him off guard. Not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. I will, he said. And I'll make sure other people do too. She nodded, accepting that as the best promise available. That night, after the apartment went quiet, Ethan sat at his desk and opened the drawer. The drawing was still there. 2 stick figures, side by side. He thought about how easily systems justified movement in the name of efficiency, how often stability was treated as a luxury instead of a necessity. He thought about how many times he had chosen distance because it was cleaner. From the hallway, he heard Annie's door open. She padded out, slower this time, sleep tugging at her. I forgot to ask, she murmured. Do you wake people up when it's time to go? No, he said. I let them wake up. Will I? She nodded, reassured, and returned to her room. Ethan sat alone in the quiet, aware that 3 days was not a solution. It was an opening. The 3rd day began with rain, not the dramatic kind that announced itself with thunder, but a steady, persistent drizzle that darkened the windows and softened the edges of the city. Ethan noticed it as he stood in the kitchen, coffee cooling in his mug, watching Annie sit at the counter and color with careful concentration. She had chosen blue that morning, the sky kind of blue. They won't come in the rain, she said without looking up. Who? People who hurry, Annie replied. They like clear days. Ethan glanced at the clock. 8:10 a.m. They said sometime today, he said. She nodded, accepting the uncertainty. That, he was learning, was a skill she had developed early. The past 48 hours had rearranged his life in ways he hadn't yet fully mapped. Meetings had been postponed, calls rerouted. His assistant had learned not to ask questions when he said he was unavailable. The apartment had shifted too, not physically, but in feeling. There were socks on the floor now, crayon marks on the coffee table, faint but unmistakable. A child-sized presence that resisted being ignored. At 9:30, the doorbell rang. Annie's hand froze mid-stroke. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She simply looked up at Ethan, eyes searching his face, waiting for direction. I'll talk to them, he said. She nodded once. I'll stay here. He opened the door to find not one person, but 3. The woman from before stood at the front, clipboard absent this time. Beside her was a man in a dark suit, mid-50s, with the practiced neutrality of someone who had spent decades in conference rooms. Behind them, a younger woman with a tablet, already typing. Mr. Cole, the suited man said. I'm Daniel Harris, Department Legal Counsel. Ethan stepped aside. Come in. They entered, taking in the space with careful eyes. The man's gaze lingered briefly on the living room, the drawings taped discreetly near the desk, the small backpack by the couch. Annie stood when she saw them, hands folded in front of her. Hello, she said politely. The man blinked, momentarily thrown. Hello. Annie. They sat at the dining table. Annie was invited to stay. She chose a chair close to Ethan, but didn't touch him. We've completed the preliminary review, Harris began. There are concerns on both sides. Ethan nodded. Go on. You are not an approved foster guardian, Harris continued. You have no prior caregiving record. This arrangement raises questions. And Annie has been moved 6 times in 3 years, Ethan said. That raises others. The younger woman typed faster. Harris clasped his hands. We're not blind to that. But procedures exist to prevent impulsive decisions. Annie spoke up, her voice steady but small. I don't feel like he's impulsive. Silence followed. Harris looked at her. Really looked. Why do you say that? She thought for a moment. He listens before he talks. Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. Harris exhaled. Annie, do you feel safe here? Yes. Do you want to stay? Yes. The word landed cleanly. No hesitation. Harris turned back to Ethan. This doesn't make the decision easier. It shouldn't, Ethan replied. It should make it clearer. The discussion stretched on. Legal language layered over human reality. Temporary measures. Extended evaluations. Risks and liabilities. Ethan listened, responded when necessary, resisted the urge to dominate the conversation. This wasn't about winning. Finally, Harris leaned back. We can authorize an extended temporary guardianship, he said. 30 days. With conditions. Annie's eyes widened. Home visits. Counseling. Ongoing review. Harris continued. At the end of 30 days, we reassess. And if you decide against it, Ethan asked, then Annie will be reassigned. He tapped her. Annie's shoulders tensed. Ethan looked at her, then back at Harris. And if it works, Harris hesitated. Then we explore permanence. Annie looked down at her hands. I don't need forever, she said quietly. I just need not to pack again. The room went still. Harris cleared his throat. We'll file the paperwork this afternoon. After they left, Annie stood very still. Does that mean I stay? She asked. For 30 days, Ethan said honestly. She nodded slowly. That's a long time. Yes, he agreed. It is. She walked to the window, watching the rain trail down the glass. Do people usually stay when they say they will? Ethan joined her. Not always. She considered this. Will you? The question wasn't accusatory. It was practical. Yes, he said. I will. That evening, Ethan took Annie out for the first time since she'd arrived. Just a short walk under a shared umbrella to the corner store. She held the handle with both hands, careful to keep pace. Inside, she wandered the aisles slowly, touching nothing without asking. Can I pick one thing? She asked. Yes. She chose a notebook with a blue cover. For my thoughts, she explained. Back home. She sat at the table and wrote carefully, tongue caught between her teeth. When she finished, she slid the notebook toward him. Do you want to see? He hesitated, then nodded. On the first page, in uneven letters, she had written, Here is where I am right now. Ethan closed the notebook gently. That night, as Annie slept, he stood in the quiet apartment and understood something with startling clarity. He hadn't saved anyone. He had simply stopped letting movement pass for care, and that, he suspected, was where everything began. The paperwork arrived before noon, not by courier, not by ceremony, but by email clean PDFs with dense paragraphs and signature lines that reduced the past 3 days to language precise enough to survive scrutiny. Ethan read every word. Twice. He noticed how often Annie was referred to as the minor and himself as the petitioner. How care became obligation, and obligation became risk. He signed anyway. Annie sat across from him at the dining table, legs tucked beneath her chair, watching his pen move with quiet concentration. Is that the part where I stay? She asked. For now, he said, handing the documents back to his tablet. She nodded, then looked down at her notebook. She had begun carrying it everywhere, as if the act of writing anchored her to the present. She opened to a fresh page and wrote slowly. 30 days. She underlined it once. That afternoon, Ethan took her to the pediatrician recommended by the department. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and crayons. Annie chose a chair near the wall and sat very straight, hands folded, eyes scanning the room with practiced caution. Do you want a sticker? The nurse asked kindly. Annie glanced at Ethan first. If you want one, he said. She nodded and accepted a small star, pressing it carefully onto the back of her notebook rather than her shirt. The appointment was routine. Height, weight, heartbeat. The doctor spoke gently, asked simple questions, avoided anything that might feel like an interrogation. Annie answered politely, clearly, without embellishment. "How do you feel today?" the doctor asked. Annie thought for a moment. "Still." The doctor paused. "That's good." Ethan wasn't sure it was. On the way home, Annie asked questions in short bursts, as if releasing thoughts she'd been storing up. Why adults talk so much when they were nervous. Why some doors locked automatically. Why people said temporary when they meant unknown. Ethan answered what he could. When he didn't know, he said so. That evening, the first home evaluation began. A woman named Margaret arrived just after 6. Late 50s, sensible coat, eyes that missed very little. She removed her shoes without being asked and spoke to Annie at eye level. "I'm just here to see how things are going," she said. Annie nodded. "Okay." Margaret observed everything. The kitchen, the guest room, the locks on the doors. She asked Ethan about his work schedule, his support system, his expectations. "I don't have experience raising a child," he said plainly. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "No one does the first time." She asked Annie questions too, but gently. What she liked to eat, whether she slept well, if she felt comfortable saying no. Annie answered honestly. She said she liked apples and cereal, that she slept better when the hallway light was on. That saying no was hard, but easier here. Margaret wrote that down. After she left, Annie sat quietly on the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest. "Did I do it right?" she asked. "There's no right way," Ethan said. "You just told the truth." She seemed to consider this, then nodded. "That's easier." Over the next few days, routines began to form. Breakfast at the counter, short walks in the evening, Annie doing homework packets the department had emailed over, Ethan working nearby. They learned each other's rhythms without discussion. Annie woke early but didn't speak until spoken to. Ethan stayed up late but checked the locks twice before bed. On the 5th night, Annie asked, "What happens if they say no at the end?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. "Then we'll talk about it," he said. Together. 82, she accepted that. But he saw the tension remain in her shoulders long after she went to bed. Later that night, Ethan received a call he'd been expecting. His attorney's voice was careful. "There's media interest, I figured," Ethan said. "They know about the guardianship petition. Do they know about Annie?" "Not by name. Yet." Ethan closed his eyes. "What are the risks?" "Public scrutiny. Accusations of overreach. People questioning your motives. And Annie?" A pause. "That's the concern." After the call ended, Ethan stood in the darkened living room, staring out at the city. He had faced criticism before. He knew how to weather it. But this wasn't about reputation. This was about a 6-year-old who flinched at doorbells and counted days as if they were fragile. The next morning, Annie came into the kitchen with her notebook open. "I wrote something," she said. "Do you want to read it to me?" She nodded and cleared her throat. "Sometimes grown-ups move you because it's easier than fixing things." She read. "Sometimes staying is harder. Harder is better." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "That's very good," he said. She looked relieved. "I didn't know if it made sense." "It does," he replied. "More than you think." That afternoon, another email arrived from the department. A notice of additional review. A reminder that nothing was guaranteed. Ethan forwarded it to his attorney without comment. Annie watched him from the doorway. "Are they mad?" she asked. "They're careful," he said. She nodded. "Careful people take a long time." "Yes," he said. "They do." That night, as Annie slept, Ethan sat at his desk and reviewed old reports, charitable initiatives he'd funded years ago, oversight committees he'd trusted. He saw now what he hadn't then. How easy it was for children to become data points, for movement to masquerade as progress. He closed the files and shut off the computer. For the first time, he understood that 30 days wasn't just a trial period. It was a test of systems, of patience, of whether anyone would choose to slow down long enough to see a child clearly. And he intended to pass it. The first headline appeared on a Tuesday morning. Ethan saw it on his phone while standing at the kitchen counter, watching Annie carefully peel the sticker off a banana and press it onto the inside cover of her notebook. Tech billionaire seeks temporary guardianship of foster child. The wording was cautious, almost respectful. That wouldn't last. He set the phone face down without opening the article. Is it bad news? Annie asked without looking up. How do you know? He said. You didn't read it, she replied. That's what you do when you don't want it to be loud. He considered that. It's not good or bad yet. It's just noise. She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her banana. By noon, the noise grew louder. His assistant called twice, his legal counsel once. A board member left a voicemail that sounded supportive but ended with a warning wrapped in concern. Ethan listened to each message, responded to none of them immediately. He had learned long ago that speed often masqueraded as control. Annie spent the afternoon at the small desk by the window, working through a new packet of worksheets emailed by the department. She read each instruction twice, then completed the work carefully, erasing mistakes until the page looked almost untouched. You don't have to make it perfect, Ethan said from the table. She didn't look up. I know, but perfect gets noticed. The sentence landed harder than he expected. Later that day, Margaret returned for a follow-up visit. She arrived with less formality this time, setting her bag down and accepting a glass of water without hesitation. There's a tension, she said once they were seated. You knew there would be. Yes. And Annie? She asked. She knows something is happening, Ethan replied. She doesn't know what. Margaret nodded. That may be for the best. Annie sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, pretending to read. When Margaret addressed her directly, Annie responded politely, answering questions without offering more than was asked. Do people ask you a lot of questions? Annie asked Margaret suddenly. Margaret smiled faintly. Yes. Do they listen to the answers? Margaret paused. Sometimes. Annie absorbed this. That's better than never. When Margaret left, she lingered in the doorway. The review committee meets Friday, she told Ethan. There are differing opinions. I expected that. Some believe this sets a dangerous precedent. And others? Margaret met his eyes. Others believe movement has become an excuse. After she left, Ethan noticed Annie sitting very still on the couch, hands folded. What's a precedent? She asked. It's when people worry that if you do something once, you'll have to do it again, he said. She thought about this. Is that bad? Not always. She nodded. Good. Because I don't think kids should have to keep starting over. Is not done. That evening, the second headline appeared. This one's sharper. Is this protection or privilege? Ethan read it this time. He read every word. He noted how carefully Annie's name was omitted, how speculation replaced facts, how intent was questioned without evidence. He closed the article before reaching the comments. At dinner, Annie pushed her food around her plate. You don't have to finish, he said. She shook her head. I'm just thinking. I was. About what? About if people decide I shouldn't be here. He set his fork down. That's not your decision to carry. I know, she said quietly. But I carry it anyway. After dinner, she asked to take a walk. They didn't go far. Just down the block, past the doorman, along the quiet street where neighbors walked dogs and avoided eye contact. Annie held Ethan's hand. Not tightly, not desperately, just enough to know it was there. A woman across the street recognized him. Slowed, whispered to the man beside her. Annie noticed. Do they know you? She asked. Yes. Do they know me? Not really. She seemed to consider that. I like it better that way. Back upstairs, Ethan received a message from his attorney. We should prepare for resistance. Some committee members feel public pressure. Ethan typed back a single sentence. So does Annie. That night, Annie knocked softly on his office door. Can I ask something? She said. Yes. 18. If they say no, she continued. Will it be because I did something wrong? Ethan stood up slowly and crossed the room until he was in front of her. No, he said firmly. It would be because adults sometimes choose rules over people. She nodded, but her eyes searched his face, as if checking for cracks. Will you tell them what I'm like? She asked. I already have, he replied, and I'll do it again. She seemed to relax slightly. Before bed, Annie added a new page to her notebook. Ethan didn't ask to see it. He had learned that some things needed to be offered, not requested. In the early hours of the morning, his phone buzzed again. Another article, another opinion, another reminder that the world preferred simple narratives. He turned the phone face down. From the hallway, he heard Annie's door open just a crack. "Mr. Cole?" she whispered. "Yes? If they decide fast," she said. "Does that mean they didn't think very hard?" Ethan considered this. "Usually," he said. "Then I hope they think slow." "So do I," he replied. When the apartment finally went quiet again, Ethan sat alone with the weight of the coming days pressing in. He knew the review wouldn't be decided by emotion. It would be decided by fear. Fear of exception, fear of criticism, fear of slowing a system built to keep moving. But he also knew something else now. Staying, even briefly, had already changed the shape of things. And that was harder to ignore than any headline. Friday arrived without ceremony. No dramatic knock, no urgent call. Just a gray morning settling over the city, heavy with the kind of quiet that came before decisions were announced by people who never had to live with the consequences. Annie was already awake when Ethan came into the kitchen. She sat at the table with her notebook open, not writing, just staring at the page as if waiting for it to speak first. "They meet today," she said. "Yes. What time?" "Late morning." "Ice." She nodded, then closed the notebook carefully and slid it into her backpack. The zipper sound was soft, deliberate. "Do you want pancakes?" Ethan asked. She shook her head. "I don't think I'm hungry." He didn't argue. He poured 2 glasses of orange juice and placed one in front of her anyway. She wrapped both hands around it, warming her fingers. At 10:47, Ethan's phone buzzed. He didn't look at it immediately. Annie noticed. "That's them, isn't it?" "Yes. Ever. Are you going to answer?" "In a moment." She nodded, as if granting permission. "Okay." He stepped into his office and closed the door halfway, not wanting to shut her out completely. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, professional, practiced. The committee had met. There had been debate, concerns raised, opinions split. Ethan listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the small drawing taped inside his desk drawer. 2 stick figures, side by side. Finally, the voice said, "We've reached a decision." Ethan closed his eyes. "Go on. We are extending the temporary guardianship." He exhaled slowly, carefully. "For another 60 days, the voice continued. With increased oversight, Ethan opened his eyes. "And after that, there will be a final review." "Based on what?" "Based on stability." The word echoed. When the call ended, Ethan stood still for a long moment. He was aware of his heartbeat, steady but loud, as if reminding him that this was not an ending, just a pause, a longer one. He opened the door. Annie stood in the hallway, backpack on, shoes neatly tied, as if prepared for any outcome. "Well?" she asked. "You're staying," he said. "Longer." She didn't smile. Not right away. "How much longer?" she asked. 2 months. She blinked. "That's a lot of days." "Yes." She thought about it, then nodded. "Okay." That was all she said. They didn't celebrate. They didn't call anyone. They sat at the table and drank their juice in silence. Outside, the rain started again. Light and persistent. Later that afternoon, Margaret came by unannounced. "I wanted to see how she took it," she said quietly. Annie sat on the floor with her crayons, arranging them by color. "Did you hear?" Margaret asked her. "Yes," Annie replied. "I'm staying." "And how do you feel about that?" Annie paused, then chose her words carefully. "Relieved, but not done." Margaret smiled faintly. "That's honest." She pulled Ethan aside near the window. "This isn't settled," she said. "You know that." "I do. There are people watching very closely now." "I expected that." Margaret studied him. "Most people don't choose to be watched." "I didn't choose this," Ethan replied. "I chose her." Margaret nodded once. "That may be the difference." That evening, Annie asked if she could unpack. "Unpack what?" Ethan asked. "My bag," she said. "Just a little." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." She took out the folded worksheet and smoothed it into a drawer. placed her socks in the closet, set the notebook on the desk by the window. She left the backpack itself, leaning against the wall. Just in case, she explained. That night, Ethan received an email from a donor group questioning his judgment, another from a colleague expressing quiet support. He read them all, then shut the laptop. Annie was already in bed, the hallway light on as usual. He stood at the door, watching her breathe, even and slow. "Mr. Cole?" she murmured, half asleep. "Yes? Do you think people can change their minds if they think long enough?" "Yes," he said. "I do. Even grown-ups? Especially grown-ups." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. Ethan stayed a moment longer, then turned off the light. In the living room, the city hummed on, unaware of the small, fragile victory that had taken place behind locked doors and careful language. He knew better than to call it safety. He knew better than to call it permanent. But it was time. Time without packing. Time without goodbye rehearsals. Time to exist without waiting for the next move. And for now, that was enough. The first Monday of the extended stay arrived with a new kind of tension. Not fear. Not relief. Expectation. Annie stood by the window with her backpack on, even though there was nowhere to go. Outside, a yellow school bus hissed to a stop across the street. Doors folding open with mechanical patience. Children spilled out, loud and unafraid, their voices rising into the gray morning. "Do you think I'll go to school again?" Annie asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "Soon. Repressin." She nodded, but didn't look convinced. "They always say soon." "I know," he replied. "This time we'll make it specific." The department had approved enrollment at a nearby public school. Temporary status, provisional paperwork, language full of conditions. Ethan had read it all before breakfast, memorizing timelines the way other people memorized menus. At 9 o'clock, the knock came. Not a doorbell. A knock. 3 firm taps. Polite. Official. Annie stiffened. Ethan noticed immediately. "I've got it," he said. She didn't move, didn't run, just stood very still as he opened the door. 2 people stood outside. A woman in her late 30s with a leather portfolio tucked against her chest, and a man with a badge clipped to his belt, not law enforcement, but close enough to feel like it to a child who had learned to fear authority. "Mr. Cole," the woman said. "I'm Dr. Elaine Porter, Child Services Psychologist." Annie exhaled softly. "She can stay," Ethan said before anyone asked. Dr. Porter nodded. "That's preferred." They sat in the living room. Annie chose the armchair closest to the window, knees drawn up, notebook clutched in both hands. She didn't open it. "This isn't a test," Dr. Porter said gently. "It's a conversation." Annie glanced at Ethan. "You can answer however you want," he said. "Or not answer at all." Dr. Porter noticed that. "Annie," she said, keeping her voice low and even, "how many places have you lived in the past year?" Annie didn't hesitate. 4. "And before that?" 2. "And before that?" Annie looked down. "I don't remember." Dr. Porter nodded, not surprised. "That's okay." She asked about sleep, food, nightmares. Annie answered carefully, offering just enough truth to remain honest without revealing too much. Ethan recognized the pattern immediately. He'd seen executives do the same thing under deposition. When Dr. Porter asked, "What do you like about living here?" Annie paused. "He doesn't rush me," she said finally. Dr. Porter looked at Ethan. "That seems important." "Yes," Ethan replied. "And what worries you?" Dr. Porter asked Annie. Annie's fingers tightened around her notebook. "That it's working too well." Silence settled. Dr. Porter leaned back slightly. "Tell me what you mean." Annie swallowed. "When things work, people get nervous. They think it won't last." Ethan felt something sharp move through his chest. "That's very perceptive," Dr. Porter said quietly. After the visit ended, Dr. Porter stood by the door, her voice lowered. "She's bright," she said, "and tired." "Yes. She doesn't trust good things. Not fully." "I wouldn't either," Ethan said. Dr. Porter nodded. "I'll recommend continuity." "Thank you. Be prepared," she added. "Stability brings its own challenges. I have dues." That afternoon, Annie sat at the table drawing while Ethan worked. She drew the apartment first, then the street, then the bus across the way. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Of course. If I start school," she said carefully, "will they make me leave if I get attached?" The question was quiet, almost casual. "No," Ethan said. "Attachment isn't a reason to leave." She looked at him skeptically. "It usually is." Ethan chose his words carefully. "It shouldn't be. 200 pesa." That night, they ate dinner earlier than usual. Annie asked for seconds without apologizing. Ethan noticed. He didn't comment. Afterward, she sat on the couch, flipping through a children's book Margaret had dropped off earlier. Halfway through, she closed it. "Do you ever worry," she asked, "that people only help when they're being watched?" "Yes," Ethan said honestly. "I worry about that a lot. Does that make the help less real?" He thought about it. "No, but it means someone has to keep watching." She considered this. "Maybe I can watch too." Before bed, Annie packed her backpack again. Not fully. Just enough to feel prepared. Ethan stood in the doorway, unsure whether to stop her. "Habit," she explained. "I know." She climbed into bed and turned toward the wall, then back again. "If I start school," she said, "and they ask about my parents, what do I say?" Ethan felt the weight of that question settle slowly. "You can say whatever feels true to you," he said. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." She nodded. "Okay, then," after a pause, "can I say I live with you?" "Yes." "Just you?" "Yes." She smiled faintly. "That sounds simple." Later that night, Ethan received another message from his attorney. "Some committee members are uneasy. They feel this is becoming emotional." Ethan stared at the words for a long moment, then typed back, "Children are emotional. Stability is not." He shut the laptop and walked the apartment once more, checking locks, lights, routines that were becoming familiar. At Annie's door, he paused. She was asleep, her notebook tucked under her arm, face peaceful in a way that still surprised him. He understood now that the real conflict was no longer with the department or the press or public opinion. It was with time. Time demanded proof. Time demanded consistency. Time exposed intentions. And time, he was learning, was the one thing Annie had been denied. Not anymore. The first day of school arrived sooner than Annie expected. Ethan noticed that immediately, not because she said anything, but because she was already dressed when he came into the kitchen. Shoes on, backpack zipped, notebook tucked inside, pressed flat as if it were something fragile. "You're early," he said. She shrugged. "I didn't want to rush." Outside, the morning was clear and cool. The rain had finally moved on, leaving the city scrubbed and sharp, edges newly defined. The school sat only 6 blocks away, a brick building with wide steps and a flag that snapped gently in the breeze. Annie slowed as they approached. "Do I have to go in alone?" she asked. "No," Ethan said. "I'll walk you in." She nodded, relieved but careful not to show it too much. Inside, the school smelled like disinfectant and paper. Voices echoed down the hallway, children laughing, lockers slamming, teachers calling names from clipboards. Annie's grip on her backpack strap tightened. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair stepped forward. "Annie?" she asked. Annie nodded. "I'm Mrs. Kaplan," the woman said. "I'll be your teacher." She crouched slightly. Not too low, not too close. Annie watched her carefully. "Do you like drawing?" Mrs. Kaplan asked. Annie hesitated. "Yes." "Good," Mrs. Kaplan said. "We'll do a lot of that." Annie glanced up at Ethan. "I'll be right here," he said. At pickup, Mrs. Kaplan noticed that too. Annie took a breath and followed her into the classroom without looking back. Ethan stood in the hallway longer than necessary. He told himself it was normal. Parents did this all the time, but he was aware of the unfamiliar ache in his chest, the strange vulnerability of leaving a child somewhere and trusting that the world would handle her gently. He left only when the bell rang. The hours crawled. Ethan attended meetings that day, but he was distracted in a way he hadn't been in years. His mind returned again and again to the classroom, whether Annie was quiet, whether she spoke when spoken to, whether she sat too stiffly in her chair. At 3 o'clock sharp, he stood outside the school again. Children spilled out in a chaotic wave. Annie emerged last. She walked carefully, scanning faces until she saw him. Her pace quickened, not running, not dramatic, just faster. "How was it?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. "Loud," she said, "but not bad. Everteed." That was high praise. On the walk home, she told him small things. That the desk wobbled, that the boy next to her chewed on his pencil, that Mrs. Kaplan smelled like peppermint. "They asked about my parents," Annie added quietly. Ethan felt his shoulders tense. "What did you say?" "That I live with you," she replied, "and that it's temporary." And how did that feel? She thought about it. Honest. That night, Annie fell asleep earlier than usual. School had taken more out of her than she let on. Ethan sat at his desk, reviewing emails he'd ignored all day. One message stood out. An invitation to speak at a foundation event. Subject line carefully worded. Tone cautious. He closed the email without responding. The next morning brought a different kind of attention. A black sedan idled across the street longer than necessary. A man pretending to check his phone glanced up at the building more than once. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. Annie noticed too. "Are they watching?" she asked softly. "Yes," Ethan said. "Is that bad?" "Not yet." She nodded. "Okay." School became routine in pieces. Annie learned the schedule quickly. She learned which teachers raised their voices and which ones didn't. She learned which kids asked too many questions and which ones watched quietly from the corners. At home, she began leaving her backpack unzipped. A small change. Almost invisible. One evening, Margaret called. "There's concern," she said. "About what?" Ethan asked. "Attachment," Margaret replied. Ethan exhaled. "Of course there is. She's adjusting well," Margaret continued. "That's the problem." "How is that a problem? In this system?" Margaret said gently. "Anything that looks permanent makes people nervous." After the call, Ethan sat at the table, staring at nothing. Annie wandered in and climbed onto the chair across from him. "They think I'm getting too comfortable," she said. "Yes," she nodded. "I thought so." She opened her notebook and slid it toward him. On the page was a simple list. Things that stay. Morning light. The walk to school. Someone waiting. Ethan read it twice. "Is that a good list?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "It's a very good list." That night, Annie didn't pack her backpack. Ethan noticed only when he checked the hallway before bed. "Did you forget?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, I just didn't feel like it tonight." He nodded, pretending not to understand the significance while understanding it completely. Later, alone in the quiet apartment, Ethan received another call from his attorney. "There's a pushback coming," she warned. "Some committee members feel you're overstepping." "By doing what?" Ethan asked. "By staying." He ended the call and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. He thought about how often institutions confused movement with safety, distance with neutrality. Down the hall, Annie slept, not clutching her backpack, not listening for footsteps, just sleeping. And for the first time, Ethan understood that this ordinary, unremarkable quiet was the most radical thing he had ever chosen. The letter arrived on a Thursday, not by email, not by phone call, a physical envelope, thick and cream-colored, bearing the seal of the department. It sat on the console table like an accusation, heavy with intent. Annie noticed it first. "That's not school mail," she said, slipping off her shoes and peering at it from a cautious distance. "No," Ethan replied. "It's not." He didn't open it right away. He waited until dinner was finished, until Annie had retreated to her room with her notebook and a library book she hadn't yet decided whether she liked. He waited until the apartment settled into its evening quiet, the kind that made decisions feel louder. He read the letter once, then again, formal language. Controlled concern. A request, not an order for a compliance meeting. Mandatory attendance. Reassessment of suitability. External review. Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Annie appeared in the doorway. "You read it twice," she said. "That means it matters." "Yes." "Is it bad?" "It's complicated." She walked in slowly and sat across from him, feet dangling above the floor. Are they trying to move me again? She asked. Ethan met her eyes. He didn't lie. They're questioning whether staying is appropriate. She nodded once. No tears, no panic. That's what happens when things look like they're working, she said. He exhaled. You shouldn't have to be this prepared. She shrugged. I didn't want to be. I just am. The meeting was scheduled for Monday. Until then, nothing changed. School continued. Homework was completed. Breakfast happened at the counter. Annie laughed once, an unexpected sound that startled them both when Ethan burned the toast and tried to pass it off as intentional. On Sunday night, Annie packed her backpack again. Not everything, just the notebook, the socks, the folded worksheet. Ethan watched from the hallway. You don't have to, he said. I know, she replied. But it helps me think. He nodded. That's fair. Monday arrived with brutal efficiency. The conference room was too bright, too clean, the table too long, the chairs arranged to create distance. Ethan sat on one side. Annie sat beside him, legs tucked under the chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Across from them sat 5 people. Daniel Harris was there, expression unreadable. Margaret sat 2 seats down, her gaze sympathetic but restrained. 2 others Ethan didn't recognize, consultants. Likely. And at the head of the table, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes sharpened by decades of policy decisions. Thank you for coming, the woman said. This is a standard review. Ethan nodded. Annie said nothing. We have concerns, the woman continued, primarily about the speed and intensity of attachment. Annie shifted. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Attachment isn't a malfunction. No, the woman said, but it can cloud judgment. Or clarify it, he replied. The woman turned her attention to Annie. Annie, do you feel dependent on Mr. Cole? Annie blinked. I feel calmer. That's not what I asked. Annie looked at Ethan. He nodded once. I don't feel trapped, Annie said carefully. If that's what you mean, the woman's lips pressed into a thin line. Do you understand that this arrangement may end? Yes. And how does that make you feel? Annie paused. Thought. It makes me tired. Silence settled over the room. Margaret spoke up. She's expressing emotional fatigue, not resistance. The woman inclined her head slightly. Noted. They asked about routines, boundaries, discipline. Ethan answered evenly, without defensiveness. He described structure without ownership, care without possession. Finally, the woman said, there is concern that this situation reflects privilege. Ethan met her gaze. There is concern that the alternative reflects neglect. The room stilled. That's an unfair characterization, the woman said. Then let's be fair, Ethan replied. She has moved 6 times in 3 years. Each move approved. Each move documented. None of them provided stability. The woman leaned back. And your solution is to exempt her from the system? My solution, Ethan said calmly, is to stop mistaking movement for care. The meeting ended without resolution. On the way home, Annie was quiet. In the elevator, she asked, did I say the wrong things? No, Ethan said. You said the true things. She nodded, absorbing that. That night, she didn't open her notebook. She sat on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the blank television screen. They looked at me like I was a problem, she said softly. They looked at you like a variable. Ethan corrected. That's different. And worse. She considered this. Do variables ever get to stay the same? Sometimes, he said. When someone decides they matter. Later, after Annie went to bed, Ethan received a call. Daniel Harris. His voice was low. They're divided, Harris said. Some want to end the arrangement. And the others? They're watching you. Ethan closed his eyes. For what? For proof, Harris replied. That this isn't about you. Ethan looked down the hallway toward Annie's room. It's not, he said. It never was. When the call ended, Ethan sat alone with the weight of it all pressing in. He understood now that this wasn't just a guardianship review. It was a referendum on whether a system could tolerate stillness. In her room, Annie slept lightly, one hand resting on the notebook, the other empty. She dreamed, though she wouldn't remember it in the morning. For the first time in years, the dream did not involve leaving. The waiting was the hardest part. Not the kind with deadlines or calendars, but the kind that crept into ordinary moments and hollowed them out from the inside. Annie felt it in the pauses between sentences, in the way Ethan lingered a second longer before answering questions, in how often adults said nothing when they meant something else. 2 days passed, then 3, no calls, no letters, no clarity. School continued as usual. Annie learned a new spelling list. She earned a sticker for finishing her math early. Mrs. Kaplan wrote a note home that said Annie was thoughtful and quietly observant. Words that made Ethan smile and ache at the same time. On Wednesday afternoon, Annie came home with a drawing folded carefully inside her notebook. "Can you put this somewhere safe?" she asked. He unfolded it. The picture showed a house with 4 windows. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. 2 stick figures stood outside, close enough that their arms almost touched. "There are only 2 people," Ethan said. Annie nodded. "It's easier that way." He pinned it to the corkboard above his desk. That night, Ethan received an email from a foundation partner withdrawing from an upcoming event. The message was polite, vague, heavy with implication. He deleted it without responding. Across the room, Annie watched him. "Is it because of me?" she asked. "No," he said immediately. She waited. "It's because some people don't like uncertainty," he added. She nodded. "Me neither." 10, Thursday morning. Annie woke from a dream she couldn't explain. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. She just sat up in bed, staring at the wall until Ethan noticed the light under her door. "I'm awake," she said when he knocked. "Do you want breakfast?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "But can we eat slow?" They did. The call came at 11:26 a.m. Ethan took it in his office, door half open. Annie sat at the table with her notebook, pretending not to listen. Listening anyway. It was Daniel Harris again. His voice was measured, careful. "There's been a development," he said. Ethan didn't respond. He had learned that silence sometimes invited truth. "The committee is recommending a transition plan," Harris continued. "Gradual." Ethan closed his eyes. "Transition to what?" he asked. "A licensed long-term foster placement," Harris said. "They believe this arrangement has become too complicated." Ethan felt the familiar heat of anger rise, controlled but intense. "Because it worked." A pause. "They won't say that," Harris replied. "And Annie?" Ethan asked. "What does she want?" Another pause. Longer this time. "That was discussed," Harris said carefully. Ethan opened his eyes and looked toward the kitchen. Annie sat very still, her pencil unmoving on the page. "What does gradual mean?" Ethan asked. 2 weeks, Harris said. "Supervised visits. Then transfer." Ethan's voice remained steady. "And if I contest?" "It will escalate," Harris said, publicly. Ethan thought of the headlines waiting to be written, the opinions already sharpened. He thought of Annie counting days like fragile objects. "I need time," he said. "You have until tomorrow morning," Harris replied. When the call ended, Ethan stayed where he was for a long moment, hands flat on the desk, breathing slow and deliberate. He knew this terrain. Pressure disguised as procedure, decisions framed as inevitabilities. He opened the door. Annie looked up immediately. "They're moving me," she said. Ethan crossed the room and knelt in front of her, careful not to crowd her space. "They want to," he said. "We haven't agreed to anything." She nodded, unsurprised. "They always do." "Good. This time," he said. "I'm pushing back." Her eyes searched his face. "Will that make it worse?" "It might," he admitted. She considered this. "I don't want you to lose things because of me." "You're not a loss," he said. "You're a person." She looked down. "People leave anyway." Ethan took a breath. "I won't." She didn't respond right away. Then she asked, "Even if they tell you to?" "Yes." That night, Annie didn't pack her backpack. She took everything out instead, laid the socks in the drawer, placed the notebook on the desk, smoothed the folded worksheet, and tucked it into a folder. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked quietly from the doorway. "Unpacking," she said. just in case staying wins. The next morning, Ethan made calls he had avoided for years. Not to lawyers, not to publicists. To people, former foster advocates, retired judges, a journalist he trusted not to sensationalize. He spoke calmly, deliberately, laying out facts without emotion, trusting that the truth carried its own weight. By noon, the response began to ripple outward. Not loud, not dramatic. Steady. That afternoon, Margaret called. "They're reconsidering," she said. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because they don't like being seen as inflexible," she replied. "And because Annie spoke up." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "She asked to be heard," Margaret said. "In writing. It's great in." Ethan looked toward the desk. Annie's notebook sat open. On the page was a single paragraph, written carefully, each letter deliberate. "I know grown-ups have rules. I know rules help sometimes. But moving me again won't fix anything. I am not broken. I just need to stay long enough to feel real." Ethan closed his eyes. That evening, the call came again. This time, the voice on the line sounded different, less certain. "The committee is postponing the transition," Harris said. "Indefinitely." Ethan let the breath out slowly. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that harm cannot be proven," Harris replied. "And benefit has." When Ethan shared the news, Annie didn't cheer. She simply sat down on the couch and leaned back, exhausted. "So I stay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "You stay." She nodded. "Okay." After a moment, she added, "Can we still go to school tomorrow?" "Yes." "Good," she said. "I don't want things to change too fast." In Dicom. That night, Annie slept without dreams. Ethan stayed awake longer than usual, watching the city beyond the glass, aware that this wasn't the end of the conflict, just a turning point. The system had blinked, not out of kindness, not out of courage, but because someone small had insisted on being seen. And that, Ethan knew, was how real change began. The calm that followed felt unfamiliar. Not relief exactly. Not safety. Something quieter. Annie noticed it first on Saturday morning, when the apartment didn't feel like it was holding its breath anymore. The light came in the same way it always did, but it didn't seem to be waiting for bad news to interrupt it. She sat at the table eating cereal, not rushing, not watching the door. "They didn't come," she said. "No," Ethan replied. "They didn't." She nodded, then frowned slightly. "Do you think they're still thinking?" "Yes," he said. "Probably. That's okay," she said. "Thinking means they haven't decided to take me." It was a child's logic, simple and painfully earned. That afternoon, Ethan took her to the park for the first time. It wasn't a grand decision, just a quiet impulse. Sunlight, open space, people moving without purpose. Annie walked slowly at first, scanning the swings, the benches, the parents watching from a distance. She stayed close, not holding his hand, just close enough that she could reach it if she needed to. A boy ran past them, laughing too loudly, nearly colliding with Annie. She stiffened, then steadied herself. "He didn't mean it," she said quickly. "I know," Ethan replied. She relaxed a fraction. They sat on a bench and watched pigeons scatter at the feet of passing children. Annie smiled once, unguarded, when one bird flapped awkwardly into the air. "That one looks confused," she said. "Yes," Ethan said, "but determined." She considered that. "I like that." On Monday, the school sent another note home. Annie had been selected to participate in a small reading group. Mrs. Kaplan wrote that she demonstrated empathy beyond her years and noticed when other children were struggling. Ethan read it twice. "She noticed me too," Annie said when he showed her. "On the first day, that matters," he said. At night, Annie began leaving her door open, just a crack at first, then wider. She didn't comment on it, neither did he. The press interest didn't disappear, it shifted. Less speculation, more caution, a few opinion pieces questioning systems rather than motives. Ethan read none of them. He had learned where his attention was better spent. One evening, a woman stopped him in the lobby. "I read about you," she said carefully. "About everything." Ethan braced himself. "My niece went through the system," she continued. "She moved 8 times before she was 10. Ethan nodded, unsure where this was going. "She doesn't remember her first apartment." the woman said, but she remembers packing. Her eyes filled, just slightly. Thank you, she said, then walked away. That night, Annie asked, do people tell you things now? Yes, Ethan said. Do you like it? No, he admitted. But some of it matters. She thought about that. Some people only tell the truth when they think it might help. Yes, he said. That's true. To have a go. On Wednesday, Margaret called with an update. They're formalizing the extension, she said. 6 months. Ethan closed his eyes. And after that, there will be a permanency hearing, Margaret replied. Adoption, guardianship, or long-term placement. And Annie? She'll have a voice, Margaret said. An official one. When Ethan shared the news, Annie didn't respond right away. 6 months was a long time. Long enough to matter. Long enough to hurt if it ended. Can I still call it my room? She asked. Yes, he said. You can, she nodded. That night, Annie added a new page to her notebook. She didn't show it to him. She left it open on the desk by the window. Later, when she was asleep, Ethan glanced at it. It read, some places let you stay. Some people let you change. Both are rare. He closed the notebook gently. The next weeks passed without incident, which, Ethan realized, was the real miracle. No emergency meetings. No sudden visits. No whispered countdowns. Annie settled into school, into routines, into the quiet confidence of knowing where she would sleep. One evening, she asked, if I get mad, will they think I'm not grateful? Ethan sat beside her on the couch. You're allowed to be mad. Even here? Especially here. She leaned back, considering the weight of that permission. On Friday, Annie brought home a permission slip for a class field trip. Can you sign it? She asked. Ethan took the paper, pen in hand. Guardian's signature, it read. He hesitated for just a moment, then signed. Annie watched closely. Is that official? She asked. Yes, he said. She nodded. Good. That weekend, Annie didn't pack her backpack at all. Instead, she rearranged her room's small things, moving the lamp, lining up her books, taping her drawings to the wall. Ethan watched from the doorway, saying nothing. You can come in, she said without looking at him. He stepped inside. She pointed to the drawings. This one is the first day. This one is the park. This one is the kitchen. And this one? He asked, pointing to a simple sketch of 2 figures standing in a doorway. She smiled faintly. That's when I stopped being scared to sleep. Ethan felt his throat tighten. That night, after Annie went to bed, he sat alone in the living room, thinking about how systems were built to manage risk, not hope. About how often children paid the price for adult caution. He knew the fight wasn't over. He knew permanence would come with its own resistance, its own scrutiny. But he also knew this. Annie wasn't waiting anymore. She was living, and that changed everything. The first real argument happened on a Tuesday night. It wasn't loud. It didn't involve raised voices or slammed doors. In many ways, it was worse than that, quiet, restrained, full of things neither of them knew how to say yet. Annie had come home from school with her shoulders tight and her answers short. How was your day? Ethan asked, setting a plate on the counter. Fine. He paused. Just fine? She shrugged and slipped past him, backpack still on, shoes still tied. Dinner came and went with little conversation. Annie ate quickly, eyes fixed on the table, pushing peas into a neat line without touching them. When Ethan asked if she wanted dessert, she shook her head without looking up. I'm going to my room, she said. Annie. Ethan replied gently. Did something happen today? She stopped in the doorway. No, she said too quickly. I just don't feel like talking. He nodded. Okay, I'll be here. The door closed, not slammed, but firm. Ethan sat alone in the kitchen longer than usual, staring at the untouched bowl of ice cream beginning to melt. He reminded himself of what Margaret had said weeks earlier. Stability brings its own challenges. Later that night, Annie came back out. She stood at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, face carefully neutral. Mrs. Kaplan asked about you, she said. Ethan looked up. What did she ask? If you were my dad, Tenon. Ethan felt the question land before the words finished leaving her mouth. And what did you say? He asked carefully. I said no, Annie replied. I said you were my guardian. That was honest, he said. She nodded. But then she asked if I wished you were. Silence filled the space between them. What did you say then? Ethan asked. Annie's voice wavered just slightly. I said I didn't know. She swallowed. Was that wrong? No, Ethan said immediately. It wasn't wrong. Have examples. She looked at him, searching his face. You didn't look disappointed just now. I'm not, he said. You should be, Annie replied softly. Everyone else is when I don't know what I feel yet. Ethan stood and crossed the room, stopping a few steps away from her. You don't owe anyone clarity, he said. Especially not before you're ready. She hesitated. What if I never am? Then that's okay too. Annie frowned. That doesn't sound true. Ethan considered his words carefully. Some people need answers. Some people need time. You've had too little of the second and too much pressure for the first. She leaned back against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. I don't want to mess this up, she said quietly. Ethan sat down across from her, keeping a respectful distance. You're not capable of messing this up, he said. Adults do that part. She gave a weak, humorless smile. That sounds right. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was tired. Eventually, Annie stood and went back to her room. Leaving the door open this time, Ethan stayed where he was, thinking about how easily adults mistook gratitude for compliance and how often children learn to hide confusion to survive. The next morning, Annie overslept. Ethan didn't wake her. When she finally emerged, hair unbrushed, shoes in hand, panic flared across her face. I'm late, she said. Yes, he replied calmly. You are. Her breath hitched. I'm sorry. Willuxter, you don't need to apologize, he said. Eat something. I'll walk you. They arrived at school 10 minutes after the bell. Mrs. Kaplan greeted Annie without comment, handing her a worksheet and smiling as if nothing were wrong. On the walk home that afternoon, Annie said, She didn't make a big deal. Good, Ethan replied. She just said tomorrow we'd start fresh. That's a good rule, he said. Starting fresh. We have Getted Fresm. That weekend, Ethan attended the foundation event he had previously declined. Not to speak, just to be present. Annie stayed home with Margaret, who had offered without being asked. They baked cookies. Too many. Annie insisted. Ethan, take a bag with him, so people know you're normal. The event was exactly what Ethan expected: polite conversation, measured praise, curiosity disguised as concern. One man pulled him aside. You're blurring lines, he said quietly. People are watching. Oaken. Ethan nodded. I know. This could cost you, the man continued. Ethan met his gaze. It already has. The man looked unsettled by that answer. When Ethan returned home, Annie met him at the door. Did they stare at you? She asked. Yes. Did you stare back? No. She smiled faintly. Good. Later that night, Annie knocked on his office door. Can I ask you something hard? She said. Yes. If they ask me someday, she said slowly. If I want you to adopt me, what should I say? Ethan felt the weight of the question settle in his chest. You should say whatever feels true to you, he said carefully. Not what you think will keep me. She nodded, absorbing that. And what if what feels true changes? She asked. Then we adjust, he said. Together. She stepped closer, then stopped herself. Okay, she said. That helps. ADN. That night, Annie wrote for a long time in her notebook. The next morning, she left it open on the kitchen counter. Ethan read it after she left for school. It said, Some people want answers. Some people want promises. I just want to know I won't disappear if I don't know yet. Ethan closed the notebook slowly. For the first time, he understood that permanence wasn't about declarations or paperwork. It was about allowing uncertainty to exist without punishment. And that, he knew, was the hardest promise of all. The first time Annie said the word out loud, it surprised them both. They were in the car, stopped at a red light, rain tapping softly against the windshield. The radio played an old song Ethan half recognized but couldn't name. It was late afternoon. That in-between hour where the day hadn't decided whether to let go yet. My caseworker called me, your daughter. Annie said suddenly. Ethan's foot tightened slightly on the brake. How did that feel? She thought about it. Really thought. Heavy, she said. But not bad. The light changed. Ethan drove on. They're not supposed to say that, she added. She corrected herself. And you? I didn't, Annie said. I just let it sit there. That night, the email came. Not threatening, not dramatic, procedural. A permanency hearing had been scheduled. 6 weeks out. Formal notice would follow. Annie would be assigned her own child advocate. Psychological evaluations, home assessments, the machinery of decision beginning to move again. Ethan read it once, then again. He didn't show it to Annie right away. Instead, he made dinner. Pasta. Too much garlic, Annie complained, but she ate all of it anyway. Later, while she worked on homework at the table, Ethan sat across from her, hands folded, searching for the right entry point. There's a meeting coming, he said. Annie didn't look up. A big one? Yes, she nodded. Is it about staying? Yes. Affirmant. She put her pencil down. Okay, that's all you want to say? He asked gently. She shrugged. I already know it's coming. You don't schedule calm. Ethan smiled despite himself. That's true. That night, Annie dreamed again. This time, she remembered it. In the dream, she was standing in a long hallway lined with doors. Each door had her name on it, written in different handwriting. Some neat, some rushed, some crossed out and written again. At the end of the hallway was a door with no name. When she reached for it, she woke up. She sat up in bed, heart racing, then lay back down slowly, staring at the ceiling until her breathing evened out. She didn't get up. She didn't pack. She didn't cry. In the morning, she told Ethan about the dream over breakfast. What do you think the last door was? She asked. He considered it. Maybe it hasn't been named yet. She nodded. That makes sense. Recust. The child advocate assigned to Annie was named Rebecca Shaw, mid-40s. Soft voice, sharp eyes. She met Annie alone first, then with Ethan, then separately again. She asked careful questions, not leading, not cold. What do you want your life to look like in a year? Rebecca asked Annie. Annie thought for a long time. Boring, she said finally. Rebecca smiled. That's a good answer. SB2. Later, Rebecca asked Ethan, what happens if Annie decides she doesn't want adoption? Ethan didn't hesitate. Then we find the next best way for her to feel safe. And if that doesn't include you? Ethan held her gaze. Then I step back without punishing her for it. Rebecca studied him. That's rare. It shouldn't be, he replied. The evaluation took weeks. Neighbors interviewed. Teachers consulted. Medical records reviewed. Annie endured it all with quiet resilience, answering questions honestly, without trying to impress. One afternoon, she came home unusually subdued. Rebecca asked me if I was scared, she said. And? Ethan asked. I said yes, Annie replied. But not of you. That was brave. She shook her head. It was just true. As the hearing approached, pressure crept back in, not from Annie, but from the world around them. Advisors cautioned Ethan about perception. Friends suggested he prepare for disappointment. Articles circulated again, more cautiously worded this time, but still circling the same questions. Why him? Why her? Why now? Ethan ignored most of it. Annie noticed anyway. They're saying things again, she said one evening. Yes. Are you tired? Yes. She leaned against him briefly, then pulled back, as if unsure whether the gesture was allowed. I can be okay if it doesn't work, she said softly. Ethan looked at her. You shouldn't have to practice being okay with loss. She nodded. I know. I just don't want you to think I expected you to fix everything. I don't, he said. I just want to show up. The night before the hearing, Annie couldn't sleep. She came out of her room quietly and sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. Ethan joined her without speaking. After a while, she said, if they ask me tomorrow what I want, I think I know what I'll say. What? He asked. I'll say I want to stay, she said. But I don't want it to be because I'm scared of leaving. I want it to be because I'm choosing it. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. That's the right reason. She nodded. I think so too. The hearing room was smaller than Annie expected. No long tables. No raised voices. Just adults sitting in a circle, files in front of them, expressions carefully neutral. When it was Annie's turn to speak, she stood on her own. My name is Annie, she said. I'm 6. I've moved a lot. She paused, then continued. I know people think kids don't know what they want. Sometimes that's true, but I know what it feels like when something is working. She looked at Ethan, then, back at the panel. I want to stay. And if I change my mind someday, I want to be allowed to say that too. Silence followed. Not the heavy kind, the listening kind. When it was over, no decision was announced, only that it would be communicated in writing. On the way home, Annie was quiet again, but this time, it felt different, not braced, just thoughtful. At home, she took out her notebook and wrote a single sentence. Even if they say no, I said yes to myself. Ethan read it later and understood that whatever happened next, Annie had already crossed a line most adults never did. She had chosen herself. The decision arrived quietly. No call, no advance warning, just another envelope on the console table, thinner than the last one, addressed in the same careful handwriting. Annie spotted it as soon as she came home from school. That one's different, she said. Yes, Ethan replied. It is. He waited again, until shoes were off, until backpacks were set down, until Annie finished her apple slices and lined the peels neatly on her plate. You're stalling, she said gently. I am, was the bastard of red. That's okay, she added. I can wait. They sat together on the couch this time. No separation. No retreat into other rooms. Ethan opened the envelope slowly, unfolding the letter with deliberate care. He read it once. Annie watched his face, not the paper. Then he read it again. Her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the cushion. Well, she asked. Ethan exhaled, long and steady. They approved the permanency plan. Annie blinked. That means, he said carefully. They're recommending long-term guardianship, with a path to adoption, if you want it later. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't cry. They didn't decide everything, she said. No, Ethan replied. They decided you get time. She nodded slowly. Time is good. He watched her process it, the way she always did internally, cautiously, making sure the ground wouldn't shift if she leaned too hard on the feeling. Does this mean I stop having caseworkers? She asked. Not yet, he said, but fewer. And fewer meetings. Do I still have to answer questions about my feelings? Yes, he said, but not to strangers every week. She considered this. Okay. That night, Annie didn't write in her notebook. She didn't need to. Instead, she asked if they could watch a movie. Not an animated one, a slow one. One with talking and pauses and long silences. Halfway through, she fell asleep against his side. Ethan didn't move. In the following weeks, things changed in small, almost invisible ways. The school updated its records. Ethan's name appeared where a rotating list had once been. Emergency contacts simplified. Permission slips signed without hesitation. Annie started correcting people gently. He's my guardian, she'd say. I live with him. No apology. No explanation. Just facts. Margaret came by one afternoon with a small cake. No writing. No celebration candles. This isn't a finish line, she said. It's a checkpoint. Annie nodded. I like checkpoints. They let her choose a new bookshelf for her room. Not because she needed one, because she wanted one. She arranged her books slowly, deliberately, leaving space at the end. For future ones, she explained. One evening, as they brushed their teeth side by side, Annie said, People don't ask me where I'm going next anymore. That's good, Ethan said. Yes, she replied. But sometimes I still hear the question in my head. That might take time, he said. She looked at her reflection. I think it's getting quieter. The first setback came without warning. A call from the district office. A complaint. Anonymous. Questioning boundaries. Questioning influence. Ethan handled it calmly. Provided documentation. Reiterated procedure. The complaint was closed within days. Annie overheard part of it. "Are they going to change their minds?" she asked that night. "No," Ethan said, "but it reminded me that progress makes noise." She nodded. "So does fear." "Yes," he said, "it does." That weekend, Annie had a sleepover. Just one friend, just one night. Ethan hovered more than he meant to. He caught himself twice. "You can go read," Annie told him. "We're fine." He smiled. "I know." When the other child left the next morning, Annie lingered at the door, watching her go. She asked if this was my forever house. Annie said, "And what did you say?" "I said I didn't know yet," she replied. "But that I hoped so." Ethan felt that familiar tightening in his chest. "That was honest," he said. "Yes," Annie replied. "And it didn't hurt like I thought it would." The months passed. The city shifted seasons. Jackets replaced sweaters. Daylight shortened. Annie grew. Not dramatically. Not suddenly, but undeniably. She spoke up more in class. She disagreed with Ethan once, firmly, respectfully, unapologetically. She learned that anger didn't equal danger. One night, as they walked home from the grocery store, Annie said, "I think staying has layers." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "I think first you stay because you're scared to leave," she said. "Then you stay because it's easier, and then maybe you stay because you choose it." "And where are you now?" he asked. She thought about it. "Somewhere between the second and third." "I know. That's a good place," he said. Near the end of the year, Rebecca visited one last time. "This is my final report," she told Annie. "You did well," Annie frowned. "I didn't know I was being graded." Rebecca smiled. "You weren't, but you were heard." After she left, Annie sat quietly for a long time. "Does this mean it's really over?" she asked. "It means one chapter is," Ethan replied. She nodded. "I think I'm ready for the next one." That night, Annie opened her notebook again. She wrote slowly, carefully. "I stayed. I changed. The world didn't end." She closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf. For the first time, she didn't leave it out where Ethan might see it. Some things, she was learning, could belong just to her. The invitation arrived by email, not mail. Annie noticed the difference immediately. "It doesn't look serious," she said, leaning over Ethan's shoulder. "No envelope means no bad news." Ethan smiled. "Sometimes it just means people are trying to be efficient." She considered that. Efficiency still scares me. It was a community event at her school. Family Day. The kind with folding tables, paper banners, and lukewarm coffee served in large plastic dispensers. The kind Ethan would normally avoid without a second thought. Annie circled the date on the calendar herself. "You promised," she reminded him. "I remember," he said. The morning of Family Day, Annie took longer than usual getting ready. She changed shirts twice. She braided and unbraided her hair, frowning at her reflection like she was negotiating with it. "What if people ask questions?" she asked. "They probably will," Ethan replied. "What if I don't want to answer?" "Then you don't," he said. "You don't owe anyone your story." She nodded, reassured. At the schoolyard, Annie spotted her classmates immediately. She waved once, then reached for Ethan's hand without looking at him. He let her. Mrs. Kaplan greeted them warmly. Other parents smiled politely, some curious, some cautious. A few lingered too long, searching for context in Ethan's face. Annie didn't flinch. She introduced him herself. "This is Ethan," she said simply. "He's my guardian. Not defensive, not proud, just true." Later, as Annie ran off to join a game, a man approached Ethan. "She's lucky," the man said, tone neutral but loaded. Ethan replied calmly, "So am I." The man hesitated, then nodded and walked away. Annie returned minutes later, cheeks flushed. "Did you see me win?" she asked. "I did," Ethan said. "I didn't know you were watching," she replied, pleased. "I always am," he said. That night, Annie talked in her sleep, not words, just sounds. Soft, uneven, like she was sorting something out in dreams. Ethan stayed nearby until her breathing evened. The following week brought another milestone. A letter from the department confirming the closure of Annie's case file under temporary review status. No fanfare. No language about endings. Just a quiet acknowledgement that things were stable enough to stop interfering. Annie read it carefully. "So they're not watching as much?" she asked. "They're trusting more," Ethan replied. She nodded. "Trust feels like leaving someone alone, but not really. That's a good way to put it," he said. On Friday, Annie came home with a flyer. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "School play auditions," she replied. "I want to try." He raised an eyebrow. "That's new," she shrugged. "I want to see if I can stand on a stage and not disappear." "That's a brave experiment," he said. She smiled. "I'm collecting those." The audition was a disaster. Annie forgot her line. Froze under the lights. Walked off stage before anyone could stop her. In the car afterward, she stared out the window, silent. "I failed," she said eventually. "No," Ethan replied. "You tried. That's what people say when you fail." "That's what people say when they understand risk," he said. She considered that. "I didn't like how it felt." "Good," he replied. "Now you know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I still want to try again." Weeks later, the official paperwork arrived for long-term guardianship confirmation. Signatures, dates, initials. Ethan read every line. Annie watched him. "You always read like something might change if you don't," she observed. "Because sometimes it does," he said. When it was done, there was no ceremony. Just dinner. Just dishes. Just the hum of the city outside. Annie sat on the floor, drawing. After a while, she said, "Do you think Isabella would like me?" Ethan froze for half a second. "I think she would," he said quietly. "Do you think she'd mind that you're doing this with me?" Annie asked. Ethan thought about it carefully. "No. I think she'd be relieved." Annie nodded. "That makes me feel better." Later that night, Annie added a new drawing to her wall. Not labeled. Just two figures walking side by side, neither ahead of the other. Winter came softly that year. Snow that didn't disrupt, cold that didn't bite too hard. Annie learned to skate badly. Ethan learned to laugh at himself trying. They built a small tradition of Sunday breakfasts, pancakes slightly uneven, music low. Annie stopped asking where things would lead. Instead, she asked what time dinner was. One evening, as they cleaned up, Annie said, "If someday I want to call you something else, can I?" Ethan didn't look at her right away. "If it feels right to you," he said. "And if it never does, then we'll still be us," he replied. She nodded. "Okay." That night, Annie slept deeply. No sounds, no stirring. Ethan sat alone in the living room, thinking about how endings rarely arrived with certainty, and how beginnings often disguised themselves as quiet persistence. He realized then that this wasn't the end of Annie's story. It was the moment where the story stopped being about survival and started being about living. The last thing Annie packed was the notebook, not because she was leaving, because she no longer needed to keep it within reach. Spring arrived quietly, the way it always did when no one was bracing for disaster. The city softened at the edges. Windows opened. People lingered. Annie noticed these things now. She noticed how long the light stayed in the evenings, how the air smelled different after rain, how the apartment felt less like a place to pass through and more like a place that waited for her to come back. The final hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. No tension, no reporters, no dramatic statements, just a judge, a few documents, and a child who had already done the hardest part. Annie sat in her chair, swinging her legs slightly, hands folded in her lap. Ethan sat beside her, still, attentive, careful not to fill the space with his presence. When the judge asked Annie if she understood what long-term guardianship meant, she nodded. "It means I get to stay," she said. "And if I have questions later, I can ask them." The judge smiled. "That's right. And if I mess up?" Annie asked. "You will," the judge replied kindly. "And you'll still get to stay." Annie looked at Ethan then, just briefly, as if confirming something she already knew. The order was signed. The file was closed. No applause followed. No tears. Just a quiet sense of something settling into place. On the way home, Annie asked to stop for ice cream. "Even though it's before dinner?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said, "especially because it is." They sat on a bench, cones melting faster than expected. "I thought it would feel bigger," Annie said. "Sometimes big things feel normal once they're done," Ethan replied. She nodded. Normal is new for me. I do. That evening, Annie took the drawings down from her wall. All of them. She stacked them carefully on her bed, sorting through them slowly. The early ones showed motion running, doors, lines that never quite met. The later ones had houses, windows, people standing still. She kept a few. The rest, she folded and placed in a box under the bed. Not thrown away, just finished. That night, Annie knocked on Ethan's door. "Can I sleep with the door closed tonight?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. She hesitated. "That means I trust you to still be there in the morning." He met her gaze. "I will be." She nodded once and closed the door gently behind her. The next morning, she woke to sunlight and quiet. No dreams, no urgency, just the sound of coffee brewing and the city beginning its day. Over the following weeks, life unfolded in ways that felt almost boring. School projects, grocery lists, arguments about bedtime. Annie joined the school play again. This time, she didn't freeze. She spoke her lines clearly, voice steady, eyes forward. Ethan watched from the back row, heart unexpectedly full. Afterward, Annie ran to him. "I didn't disappear," she said. "No," he replied. "You didn't." She grinned. "I think I like being seen now." Summer came. Annie learned to swim properly, no longer clinging to the edge. She scraped her knee once and cried without apologizing for it. She asked questions that didn't come with backup plans. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape watching the city lights flicker on, Annie said, "I don't think about leaving anymore." Ethan didn't answer right away. "That's good," he said finally. "But if you ever do, we'll talk about it." She nodded. "I know." A pause. "Can I try calling you something?" she asked quietly. "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," she replied, "but not all the time." "That's fine," he said. She took a breath. "Okay, Dad." The word landed softly, not heavy, not final, just real. Ethan didn't move, didn't correct her, didn't reach for the moment. He simply nodded. "Okay." She smiled, relieved. "I might change my mind tomorrow." "That's allowed," he said. She leaned back, satisfied. That night, Annie took out the notebook one last time. She flipped through the pages slowly, rereading the words she had once needed to survive. Then she turned to the last blank page and wrote, "I didn't disappear. I didn't have to earn staying. I was already enough." She closed the notebook. This time, she didn't put it on the shelf. She placed it in a drawer and shut it. Years later, Annie would remember this summer not for the paperwork or the hearings, but for the way time finally felt like it belonged to her. For the way she learned that safety wasn't silence and love wasn't control. Ethan would remember it as the season he stopped measuring his life by losses and started counting ordinary moments instead. They would never call their story perfect. It wasn't, but it was honest, and it lasted. Because long after the system stepped back, after the files were archived and the scrutiny faded, one simple truth remained. A little girl had asked not to be taken. A man had listened, and together, they chose to stay. The last thing Annie packed was the notebook, not because she was leaving, because she no longer needed to keep it within reach. Spring arrived quietly, the way it always did when no one was bracing for disaster. The city softened at the edges. Windows opened. People lingered. Annie noticed these things now. She noticed how long the light stayed in the evenings, how the air smelled different after rain, how the apartment felt less like a place to pass through and more like a place that waited for her to come back. The final hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. No tension, no reporters, no dramatic statements, just a judge, a few documents, and a child who had already done the hardest part. Annie sat in her chair, swinging her legs slightly, hands folded in her lap. Ethan sat beside her, still, attentive, careful not to fill the space with his presence. When the judge asked Annie if she understood what long-term guardianship meant, she nodded. "It means I get to stay," she said. "And if I have questions later, I can ask them." The judge smiled. "That's right. And if I mess up?" Annie asked. "You will," the judge replied kindly. "And you'll still get to stay." Annie looked at Ethan then, just briefly, as if confirming something she already knew. The order was signed. The file was closed. No applause followed. No tears. Just a quiet sense of something settling into place. On the way home, Annie asked to stop for ice cream. Even though it's before dinner? She asked. Yes, Ethan said, especially because it is. They sat on a bench, cones melting faster than expected. I thought it would feel bigger, Annie said. Sometimes big things feel normal once they're done, Ethan replied. She nodded. Normal is new for me. I see. That evening, Annie took the drawings down from her wall. All of them. She stacked them carefully on her bed, sorting through them slowly. The early ones showed motion running, doors, lines that never quite met. The later ones had houses, windows, people standing still. She kept a few. The rest, she folded and placed in a box under the bed. Not thrown away, just finished. That night, Annie knocked on Ethan's door. Can I sleep with the door closed tonight? She asked. Yes, he replied. She hesitated. That means I trust you to still be there in the morning. He met her gaze. I will be. She nodded once and closed the door gently behind her. The next morning, she woke to sunlight and quiet. No dreams, no urgency, just the sound of coffee brewing and the city beginning its day. Over the following weeks, life unfolded in ways that felt almost boring. School projects, grocery lists, arguments about bedtime. Annie joined the school play again. This time, she didn't freeze. She spoke her lines clearly, voice steady, eyes forward. Ethan watched from the back row, heart unexpectedly full. Afterward, Annie ran to him. I didn't disappear, she said. No, he replied. You didn't. She grinned. I think I like being seen now. Summer came. Annie learned to swim properly, no longer clinging to the edge. She scraped her knee once and cried without apologizing for it. She asked questions that didn't come with backup plans. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape watching the city lights flicker on, Annie said, I don't think about leaving anymore. Ethan didn't answer right away. That's good, he said finally. But if you ever do, we'll talk about it. She nodded. I know. A pause. Can I try calling you something? She asked quietly. You don't have to, he said. I want to, she replied. But not all the time. That's fine, he said. She took a breath. Okay. Dad. The word landed softly. Not heavy. Not final. Just real. Ethan didn't move. Didn't correct her. Didn't reach for the moment. He simply nodded. Okay, she smiled, relieved. I might change my mind tomorrow. That's allowed, he said. She leaned back, satisfied. That night, Annie took out the notebook one last time. She flipped through the pages slowly, rereading the words she had once needed to survive. Then she turned to the last blank page and wrote, I didn't disappear. I didn't have to earn staying. I was already enough. She closed the notebook. This time, she didn't put it on the shelf. She placed it in a drawer and shut it. Years later, Annie would remember this summer not for the paperwork or the hearings, but for the way time finally felt like it belonged to her, for the way she learned that safety wasn't silence and love wasn't control. Ethan would remember it as the season he stopped measuring his life by losses and started counting ordinary moments instead. They would never call their story perfect. It wasn't, but it was honest, and it lasted. Because long after the system stepped back, after the files were archived and the scrutiny faded, one simple truth remained. A little girl had asked not to be taken. A man had listened, and together, they chose to stay. The story reminds us that true justice is not loud, dramatic, or perfect. It is patient, human, and deeply personal. It shows that children do not need to be rescued by grand gestures. They need adults who listen, stay, and refuse to treat them as problems to be managed. The lesson is simple, but difficult. Stability is not something a child must earn through good behavior or gratitude. It is something they deserve by being human. When an adult chooses presence over power and care over control, healing begins. In a world that often moves children around to protect systems, this story argues that real moral courage lies in standing still and saying, "You can stay." This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.